Okay, boys and girls, now that we've learned all about Wyoming, where it is on the map, and what Wyoming looked like in the 1940s, we are ready to read our story in our close reading book. So make sure you have your close reading book out in front of you and open to page 6. And thank you for tracking along in your book as I read. We're going to be reading a story today that takes place in Wyoming in the 1940s. And the title is Ranch Flyer. And right away, I can see on the right hand side is an old style airplane that we don't see anymore. Some of the things I'm going to be thinking about as I'm reading is what is this text mostly talking about? And what are some details that help me figure out what the text is talking about? I'm also going to be thinking about words that I don't understand or know. I'm going to be using context clues to help me figure out what they mean. Do you remember what context clues are? That's right. They are words and sentences around a word that we don't know, and those words and sentences help us figure out what that word might mean. Thank you for tracking along as I read. Let's start. It says, when I was a girl, my family spent every summer in Bighorn, Wyoming. That's where my mother came from. And right away, I see an I sentence. And I know it's a girl telling a story. Her family were sheep ranchers with enormous herds of sheep. And I see the word enormous. I also see sheep ranchers. Herds of sheep. Herds of sheep. I know the word herds means a big, large group of animals. So enormous must mean really big. And if I look down on the bottom of the page, I can see a lot of sheep. So sheep ranchers must be people who are in charge of the sheep, who make sure that they're doing the right thing and they don't lose any. And maybe even they raise sheep. Let's move on. We have, because I love riding horses in the beautiful countryside, I looked forward to those visits all year long. They were the best times. So I can tell by reading this, because she said when I was a girl, my family spent summer in Bighorn, and I know that this story must have taken place a long time ago, even for the girl telling the story, so maybe that's when she was a child. So right now I'm thinking that the girl must be a grown adult and she's telling us the story about her childhood. Let's read on. In 1945, I was just 10 years old. I knew it. World War II had just ended. 1945 was a long time ago, and I know there was a world war during those times. My cousin Gene had been in the Navy. Now he was back home on the ranch. He was much older than me, and I had always admired him. One day I was playing at the creek with my sister Bethy when cousin Gene walked up. So now I'm going to stop and think here. So we know it's taking place in 1945 and she was 10 years old. And I'm thinking about her cousin. Her cousin Jean was in the Navy. And I know the Navy is part of the military. Other parts are the Army, the Marines, the Air Force. Okay? Now he was back home. And I know that she's very excited that he's there. Let's move on and see what happens. Ah, look at the picture on the top of page 7. I can see the state of Wyoming and where it's located on the map. And then I think about where I am. I'm right about here in Florida. Right about, probably right there, right? And I can see how far away Wyoming is. The other thing I see is that there's a lot of mountains. We don't see those in Florida, so that's very different. I can also see these homes over here, and I'm thinking, well, that must be where they do some ranching. Oh, here's our caption. It says the Wyoming Hills. Let's continue our story. It says, "How does a quick spin to the mountains sound, girls?" he called. Then he marched straight to the barn where the airplane was. Oh boy, Cousin Gene sounds like the best guy ever. He just came home from a war, and now he's going to take them for a ride in the airplane. That's exciting. I would be very happy. We stood back as Gene started the plane up. The roar of the engine and the rush of air made me dizzy. When we climbed in the tiny cabin of the plane, it was so small that I had to sit on Bethy's lap. Then we were rolling, then up, up. It was amazing. Everything looked so different. The fields, the mountains, the house and barn. The house and barn were minute. I almost said minute there, because that's the word I know. I'm going to go back and I'm going to look at this. First of all, did you hear the mistake I made? I said when, and what was the word? That's right, it was then we climbed in the tiny cabin of the plane. Good job if you caught me. It was so small that I had to sit on Bethy's lap. Then we were rolling and then up, up. It was amazing. Everything looked so different. The fields, the mountains, the house and barn were minute. So one of the things I know that when I'm in an airplane and we're going up, 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 things start to get smaller and smaller and smaller. So I wonder if this word here might mean that. Let's continue on. Ah, look at the gentleman in the airplane. He's the pilot. And we can see land behind him over here. And everything looks so tiny and small. Let's read our caption. It says, "Flying sure has changed since 1945. Okay, let's continue our story. It says, "Gene flew us to a meadow high in the mountains where the sheep were. He was delivering supplies to the shepherds who cared for the sheep there. Gene explained that flying had a really big effect on ranchers' lives. In the past, it took all day to drive or ride horses up there." Oh, so now I see what Gene was doing. He was helping out the shepherds the sheep ranchers. What was he doing to help them? See if you can underline where it talks about what he was doing to help. What was something he was doing? Did you find it? If you said he was delivering supplies to shepherds, you are absolutely right. Let's check this sentence over here. It says, Jean explained that flying had a really big effect on ranchers' lives. What do you think that sentence means? If you weren't sure, read the next sentence after it. It says, in the past, it took all day to drive or ride horses up there. So I'm thinking that this phrase here had a really big effect on ranchers' lives. Means that flying sure helped a lot. Because if it took all day to drive or ride horses up there, that was hard and a very long wait. Let's see what else he says. He says, with a plane, Jean shouted over the engine, it's a piece of cake. We can get that job done in just over an hour. Piece of cake? Are they talking about birthday cake? What does this phrase mean? Let's go back and check. It says, with a plane, Jean shouted over the engine, it's a piece of cake. We can get that job done in just over an hour. He said that right after saying that in the past it took all day to drive or ride horses up there. So I'm thinking a piece of cake must mean very easy. Not the kind of cake we eat for our birthday. So I want you guys to think. The author telling a story is Peggy Dunlop Little. And I think she did a really good job about telling us how things were like when she was a child, when she was 10 years old. Let's see what it says about her. It says, Peggy Dunlop Little grew up in Fremont, Nebraska, and in Bighorn, Wyoming. Peggy eventually settled with her family in New Hampshire, where she is an active community member and sponsor of local artists. Her dog is named Henry. Here's Henry. What I loved about this story is she used I statements. Like we could hear her actually telling the story as we were reading it. And that's called having voice, boys and girls. That's something you'll learn later on, but having voice just means that you're such a good storyteller that you can make a mental movie in your mind as the person is telling the story. So, boys and girls, I want you to think about it. If you were telling a story about your childhood, maybe an event that you got to do that was special or really fun, what story would you tell about? Good job reading the story, boys and girls. Now it's time to move on to Ranch Flyer written response. Good luck.